All right, well, it's finally here, the Google Pixel 4a. Google sent us this phone ahead of its release, so in this video, we're going to go over what's new with the Pixel 4a, as well as answer some questions that you all have about this phone. Now, first, let's talk about how this phone actually feels when you first get it. Compared to the previous generation, which was the Pixel 3a, the 4a has a slightly larger screen size with a 5.8-inch diagonal screen compared to the 5.7-inch screen on the 3a. However, keep in mind that the 3a is 0.3 inches longer and 0.1 inches wider than the 4a. So when you hold the 4a, it's less bulky in your hand than the 3a with a larger screen, and it just feels great to hold. The 4a also just looks much more modern with the slimmer bezels and the hole punch camera, which to be honest I prefer much more than a notch. Like the Model T in the early 20th century, you can get the Google Pixel 4a in a variety of colors as long as it's just black. The 4a's display is OLED like it was on the 3a with a slightly higher PPI count and HDR support. The screen isn't the best OLED display I've ever seen. It's a little bit warmer than the Pixel 3a's screen, and I actually think that the viewing angle distortion of the OLED display on the 4a is actually worse or just more noticeable than it is on the Google Pixel 3a. However, if you use dark theme on Android, you're not really going to notice it. One new addition to the screen on the 4a is screen attention, which debuted on the Pixel 4 and 4 XL last fall. It's one of my favorite features because it keeps your phone's display on and from going dark when you're reading something on the screen, and I'm glad to see that Google brought this feature over to the 4a. Another thing to talk about with the display is brightness, and from what I can tell in just a limited comparison test between the 4a I have as well as the 4 XL and 3a, I'd say the screen brightness of the Pixel 4a is just a hair better than my Google Pixel 4 XL. Now, it's also kind of hard to compare the two because my 4 XL has ambient EQ, and from what I can see in the Google Pixel 4a's settings, it does not have ambient EQ. Google actually says the 4a has ambient EQ on its website, but I can't find the toggle for it in settings, so I'm following up with them to clarify that. Another big improvement with the 4a is how it feels in your hand. The back of the 4a feels more premium than the 3a. Google seems to have taken the brushed metal-like texture that was on part of the back of the 3a and applied that coating to the entire body of the 4a, including the sides, which gives it a much more premium feel, and it doesn't feel cheap when you pick it up. I also love the pop of color button they added. My Pixel 3a just black model didn't have that, but the case did, and I love that Google added it directly to the phone like they did with the Pixel 4 XL. Another small subtle change Google made was getting rid of the plastic ring embedded within the Pixel's imprint sensor on the back of the 3a in the 4a, which again gives it a nice brushed metal type feel all around. Alright, so when actually using this phone, this thing feels pretty snappy. I mean, especially for a phone at this price, it feels as fast as it should be. Now, if you compare it to something like the Google Pixel 4 or a 120 Hz display phone, obviously those are going to feel faster because this only sports a 60 Hz display. But for a phone at this price, it feels pretty fast, and the processor in my limited testing does feel adequate enough. Now, if you're planning on keeping this phone past 3 years, yeah, that may be pushing it. It really all depends on how Google continues to optimize Android for this hardware later on down the road. Now, if you're comparing this phone to the iPhone SE, yes, obviously the iPhone SE's processor is going to just blow this thing out of the water. Apple's been just running away in the processor game in smartphones for a while now because they have their own custom silicon. I do want to make the point, I don't see enough of people making it. It's not like if you pick the SE over this thing, the SE is just never going to slow down either. Apple still does slow down phones to prevent battery degradation, or there are other things that can also contribute to your phone's performance like storage and RAM. So if you fill its storage up, it it's likely not going to be as fast. And do keep in mind that this phone has double the storage at $50 less than the starting iPhone SEs. Now, moving back to the 4a, let's talk about haptics. Haptics are another thing I love about Pixel phones. I love having haptic feedback with every tap on the software keyboard. The 4a's haptics are a little bit better than the 3a's. I'd say the 4a has just a little bit more spring in the haptic response, though I'd say it's still not maybe quite as good as the Pixel 4 XL that I have. Now, another thing that distinguishes the 4a from the 3a is that in the 4a, Google decided to bring the new on-device Google Assistant that debuted with the Pixel 4 last fall. The biggest selling point of the new Google Assistant is that it works on device, so you don't have to have a data connection for it to perform a lot of different functions within the OS. Also, for all requests, it processes what you're saying on the device itself, so in a lot of cases, it's much faster, especially when doing things like asking for specific photos. Here's an example between the Pixel 3a and the Pixel 4a. Show me my photos of sunsets. Turn on flashlight. Turn off flashlight. Open The Verge. Go to allrecipes.com. Search for vanilla custard recipes. Now, the camera is probably the other big upgrade with the 4a over the 3a. You do get the 12 megapixel camera found in the Google Pixel 4 with the Google Pixel 4a, as well as you get live HDR preview and shadow and exposure controls. And in my experience with using the Google Pixel 4 XL as my personal device, I've been using it since it came out last year. If you want to take better photos, mastering shadow and exposure control, that is going to give you dynamically just better photos than just upgrading the camera sensor, things like that. So if you learn to master those controls, it is going to just give you way better photos than you've been able to take previously. I can say that both the selfie and main cameras have been improved over the 3a, and in my limited testing so far, they seem to produce slightly sharper, more detailed images and are better at processing photos faster and deal with the exposure from light sources better. All right, before we wrap up, let's go through some additional questions submitted from our subscribers about the Pixel 4a. The first one, how good, crisp and loud are the speakers? I think the speakers are actually pretty decent on the 4a. Compared to my Pixel 4 XL speakers, the sound isn't as full, I'd say, but it's hard to actually distinguish a significant difference between them. They definitely sound improved from the Pixel 3a's speakers. All right, next question. Is it worth it for someone who's coming from a 3XL? I think everything's better except the battery. If you're coming from a Google Pixel 3 XL, you actually may want to wait for the Google Pixel 4a 5G. Like, even if you don't care about 5G, you may want to wait for that phone if you want to keep a phone with a larger size. But in general, I do agree that yes, I do think Google pretty much improved everything with the 4a compared to the 3a. Is the Pixel 4a worth replacing my Pixel 3a? That's a tough one. I do think the main reason you do it is for the new camera controls, the new Google Assistant, and of course the new form factor. But I can't say yet whether or not that justifies a new purchase. I need to spend a little bit more time with this phone before I make that call. All right, well, if you like this video, and I hope you found it helpful, if you did, make sure you hit that thumbs up button below and subscribe to the channel to see our reviews on the Google Pixel 4a, as well as our other Google product videos and other tech reviews. Now, if you have any questions at all about the Google Pixel 4a, make sure you leave a comment below so we can help answer them. For 6 months later, I'm Josh Tedder. Thanks for watching.